How would our next witness wish to be known?
Judith, sir.
Judith, please.
Please state your full name.
Judith Ann Thomas.
Take the book in your raised hand and repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Judith, you're here to talk about your late husband, Christopher,
I am.
and you've provided us with a photograph of him to be on the screen during your evidence.
Oh, yes.
There it is. Can you tell us first how you met?
Yes, we met. He was teaching in Cardiff in the local school, and I was training as a physio in the Cardiff Royal Infirmary, and it was the school near the Cardiff Royal Infirmary. And I met him at a party, and he took me to the zoo on our first date.
What was he like as a person?
He was very energetic and lively and lived life to the full in no uncertain terms. He enjoyed sport, especially water sports, swimming, canoeing, sailing. He became a sailing instructor, and he enjoyed entertaining. We had lots of parties, barbecues. He liked dancing and singing, not particularly well, but he enjoyed all that sort of thing, yes. He was very sociable.
Christopher had mild haemophilia A.
As I understand it, yes.
How often, as far as you're aware, how often did he have bleeds as a child and young person?
Quite often. I'm not sure, as of course I didn't know him then, but I know he did have a number of problems and had to be treated when he was a child.
Your understanding from Christopher's family is that although he bled frequently, it was more because he was doing an awful lot rather than because he had a particularly severe condition.
Yes, he didn't suffer from spontaneous bleeding. It was more, if he'd fallen out of a tree or something as a child, or doing things that young lads do.
At the age of 21, Christopher underwent a through-hip amputation of his right leg.
He did.
Can you tell us what you know about that?
Well, I didn't meet him until after that, after he'd had his amputation of his leg. But I do. It saved his life, basically, as far as I know. And he had it in Cardiff Royal Infirmary, and I think he was under Professor Bloom at the time.
He'd had gangrene after a non-union of a fractured femur.
That's as I understand it.
As you understand it. And so what were Christopher's views of Professor Bloom because of that treatment?
Well, he was held in very high esteem by Christopher's parents and family, obviously, because basically he saved his life with that operation because it was a very risky operation on a haemophiliac. As
you said, you met Christopher after his amputation.
Yes.
And despite his amputation, he became a teacher and
Yes.
taught a lot of extracurricular activities as well.
He did. He'd started his training, I think, before he had the amputation in Carmarthen. He was in the Teachers Training College there, and but then he lost a year when he was in hospital for I think about 9 months when he had the amputation. So he had to. When he recovered, he went back to college, but then he had to go back a year later, if you know what I mean. But he went on to qualify as a teacher and taught in various... Well, that's how I first met him, in the school that he...
And he did outdoor pursuits with the children at the school?
Yes, he used to take them camping and canoeing and fishing and, you know, all sorts of other outdoor pursuits, you know.
And you bought a terrace house together and Christopher converted it into flats?
We did. He, when we were first married, we bought a terraced house in Cardiff, and we converted it into flats so that we could let the flat and pay the mortgage. And he did a lot of the work himself. As I say, it was a bit Heath Robinson, some of it, but I think it's still up today. Actually, he put some stairs going up to the outside for access to because we had the upstairs flat, and he put in a flight of stairs going up to the back window, and it's still up today, I think, amazingly. But he used to use things like sledgehammers and things which wasn't really advisable in his condition. You know.
1973, 1974, you bought a derelict cottage, and again, Christopher did a huge amount of work on that cottage.
He did. After we'd had our children, he wanted basically a bigger garden. He also, he was a very proud Welshman, and he wanted his children to be brought up Welsh speaking. So we looked for cottages, and we found one on the Llyn Peninsula, which is beautiful. And that's where I'm living today, still.
But in terms of the work on the cottage, he did the fencing, the cementing,
oh, he did
tiling
lots,
the roof.
yes.
Absolutely everything.
Put in the windows, and he was on the roof doing the slates.
So despite his haemophilia and despite the amputation, Christopher was an incredibly active, physical man. Very
much so, yes. And he was really quite big built. I mean, after the amputation, of course, after the amputation, they were afraid, well, with the haemophilia, that he wouldn't be able to wear an artificial leg. He wouldn't be able to withstand the wearing an artificial leg. So he was on crutches for a long time, which built up his upper body strength. So he was quite, he was very strong, really, considering his disabilities.
In terms of Christopher's haemophilia, where was he treated?
Well, originally he was treated in Cardiff, in the Cardiff Royal Infirmary, and Professor Bloom. And then later, when we moved up to the Llyn Peninsula, he was treated in Bangor, in the University Hospital in Bangor.
And generally, when he had a bleed, he'd go to hospital for the treatment or to your GPs?
Well, yes, he'd have... Originally, he used to go to hospital. He used to have cryoprecipitate, I think, originally, and he'd have to be hospitalised sometimes for a couple of days. But latterly, when he went on to the Factor 8, he would go to Bangor, and they would give him a couple of days' supply, and then he'd bring that back, and the local GP surgery would administer the Factor 8 for him. It was pre home treatment, In
1983, Christopher took early retirement. Why was that? What triggered the early retirement?
Well, he was having a lot of problems and bleeds into his ankle. Of course, he only had the one, didn't he? And that was becoming problematic. Yes.
And you mentioned earlier he'd also had a bad bout of flu. Can you tell us about that?
Well, yes. I only sort of thought about this afterwards, because he hadn't been diagnosed by then, but he did have a bad bout of flu, and he was in bed, which was unheard of with flu. He didn't usually get things like that, to be honest, but he did have a particularly bad dose of flu I think that was 83, yeah.
In February 1984, Christopher was advised to have an HIV test. Why was that? What led to that?
Well, I'm not quite sure what... I think, I mean, he was well read, and he read about it in the papers. He was aware of the AIDS relationship with and haemophilia, you know, it was in the papers and things like that. But even before that, maybe he'd read about it, and I think I can't recall him ever having a letter to invite him for a HIV test, but I think he must have discussed it with Tom Corn, the consultant haematologist in Bangor, and been advised to have it or asked to have it, I don't know.
And there was a wait for 2 weeks for the results.
Yes.
And how did you both feel while you were waiting?
Very anxious, and we were well aware of the implications, really. So it was quite a worrying time. Well, it had been worrying when he thought about it, when we realised of the possibility of it, really. So then we went to see Dr. Corn. We both went to get the result together, and we were told in a very professional circumstances in Dr. Corn's office, and he told Christopher that he was positive. Of course, we were devastated, and he did give us advice about how to cope with the condition, and how we knew how it was transmitted, and so. Well, it's devastating, isn't it? I thought he was going to die, I was going to die, and the kids probably would die as well, but we didn't, you don't. But then when you're in that situation, you just have to deal with it, don't you? And just have to sort of take it a day at a time, really. And
when Christopher was told he was positive, you were at the appointment, you immediately asked to be tested as well?
I did.
Was that something you discussed before the appointment?
I don't know, really. I just thought, I want to be tested now.
You then had to wait for your own results?
Yes, we had to wait another 2 weeks. Well, that was a very worrying 2 weeks to have. And then fortunately, we went back, but I was negative. So that I was very fortunate.
Can we have document 2407005, please, Paul? It's a letter from the 24th of February 1984 from Professor Bloom to Dr. Corn. Christopher had been going down to Cardiff sometimes to deal with his ankle problems, as well as being seen in Bangor.
I think so, yes, possibly, yes.
I think your daughter was clearer that she remembered that her dad was going down to Cardiff for certain treatment and in Bangor for others.
Yes.
We've got this letter in February 1984, at the 24th of February, which you think was after Christopher's diagnosis of being HIV positive.
Yes.
And it records a clinic appointment with Professor Bloom and an orthopaedic surgeon discussing possible ankle fusion. But it makes no reference at all to his HIV or HTLV3 as it was then, diagnosis. And you find that strange, that there's nothing in here about it?
Yes, yes.
You've obtained Christopher's medical records, and it's right, isn't it? There's no clinical notes or letters recording the first positive test or of him and you being told of his diagnosis?
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't had any of those communications, no.
And you've gone through the records, and your solicitors have gone through the records, and there doesn't seem to be anything?
There doesn't seem to be any, no.
When Christopher was told about his diagnosis, how did he react?
Well, he was distraught, obviously, and, well, yes. But then, you know, we just had to deal with it, and we had a dishwasher to make sure that the dishes were clean, and we bought new towels and made sure that the kids didn't, that we were very concerned about the cross-infection, contamination really, and using toothbrushes and razors and things like that. And of course telling the children about it was worrying, that wasn't an easy thing to do, but he was very good at that. He did that himself really, and I just let him tell them in a way that was best for him really.
Oh, and what did he tell them? What did he say?
Well, I don't think he made it too alarmist. You know, he did tell them that he had a condition with his blood and we must be very careful, and so that we don't cross-contaminate anything, you know.
And I think your children's recollections of being told not to tell anyone else about it and sort of keep it within the family.
Well, yes, they were told not to discuss it with everybody. No, yes.
Could we have document 2407006, please? It's another letter from Professor Bloom to Dr. Corn in June 1985, so a little bit of time after his diagnosis, and it records that Christopher had called in to see our social worker, who confirmed what you've already told me, that Christopher is very psychologically perturbed over his HTLV3 positivity.
Yes.
Is that your recollection
Yes.
of Christopher's mental well-being?
Absolutely, yes.
Did he receive any counselling or psychological support at that point?
I think he did go and see one of the social workers in Cardiff Royal Infirmary. Yes, I think he did have some counselling, but it was in Cardiff and we were up in the Llŷn Peninsula, so it was a bit of a long way to go. But
How long would the journey take?
4 hours. Well, five in those days probably.
And can you tell us how Christopher was physically at that point in time, in those early years?
Well, at the beginning, physically he was okay, you know. He was able to do what he enjoyed doing, and he was able to carry on really. For a couple of years, maybe 2 years, 2 or 3 years, yeah.
About 1987, Christopher was started on treatment for his HIV.
Yes.
What can you tell us about that?
He was put on the AZT, azathioprine, and I can't remember exactly what his symptoms were at that time, but he was beginning to get symptoms probably at that time. What year did you say?
1987.
Oh, yes, that was John's wedding, wasn't it? Yeah. Just before, yeah. So he'd lost a lot of weight. He'd lost some weight by then anyway, quite a considerable amount of weight, and he was tired and, yes. And he used to experience a lot of diarrhea and stomach problems and all sorts of, he'd had a few sinusitis and things like that.
As Christopher began to decline and just start to become unwell, what impact did that have on you and the children?
Well, basically, at the beginning, I think I used to work, I did some extra work because, of course, he'd taken early retirement, so we were a bit financially, we didn't have as much. So I did extra work, and so the children had to do lots more at home, helping out with, cooking and gardening and all the things that need doing. which they might have had to do anyway, I don't know.
At that stage, as Christopher started to become unwell, did you tell many people about his diagnosis?
Well, to be honest, his medical condition, I mean, with medical confidentiality, it wasn't up to me to tell people really, and it wasn't something you shared with everybody, for the reasons we've heard before, with the stigma and lack of knowledge really about the condition. And I was working as a physio as well, so it was, you know, quite an anxious time really. But yes, but eventually I did finish work, yes.
You mentioned working as a physio. What was your particular concern about your job if people found out that Christopher had HIV?
Well, the fact that I was negative, you know, people don't understand necessarily all the implications today, and so and they just didn't understand about the condition, I suppose. It's not something that you discuss really unless you have to, you know. Obviously, if you're going for some sort of medical treatment and things, or dental treatment, then you would mention it then.
You had some support through the Birchgrove group.
Birchgrove group, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, Mary Dykes, the social worker, set up the Birchgrove group, and right at the beginning when he, when he was first diagnosed, really, and we did, but we lived in North Wales then, so we did come down and go to a couple of those meetings, which were very helpful. You didn't feel so much alone, if you know what I mean, you know, and you could talk freely with people because they were all in the similar situations to yourself and understood what was going on, you know.
You've said in your statement you also attended some meetings that the Haemophilia Society organised, which you found very helpful.
We went to a women's weekend up in Newcastle on Tyne, and I went to my sister-in-law, and I found it extremely helpful, very supportive.
From about 1988, Christopher's condition really started to deteriorate.
Yes.
He had problems with eating and weight loss.
Yes.
What other difficulties did he have about that time? I'm just trying. 1988.
Yes, he lost a lot of weight. He was very weak, and yes, he had problems. He had diarrhea and all sorts of sinusitis, all sorts of infections like that.
I think by then he also had some neurological difficulties.
Well, I feel that was probably just about when that... Yes, he did have neurological symptoms like tingling in his fingers, and he couldn't write. He used to write letters to my daughter who's in college, and he found he couldn't write properly, you know, and then of course it had effects. He couldn't wear his leg because of because it was uncomfortable, and his good leg had become weaker as well, and with the ankle problem, you know, so there was problems. But so he started using a wheelchair more often. He did use a wheelchair occasionally, you know, if he'd had, before he used to use it. He always had a wheelchair, you know, access to a wheelchair then.
But around this time, he really became much more dependent on the wheelchair.
Yes.
And unable to use his artificial...
Yes. Or his crutches, really, because of his hands, you know, because of the tingling in his fingers and hands.
Christopher gave up driving at about the same time,
Yes.
and he could no longer really get to the beach himself or go sailing.
No. Yes. His social life was compromised quite, and, well, just life in general was compromised really by his condition.
What was the effect of that inability to go to the beach and inability to go sailing and drive on his emotional well-being, on his mental well-being?
Well, he became quite depressed and angry. I think the anger was more at the beginning. I think towards the end it was more of a depression, you know. Yes.
At around about this time, you went on to sick leave from your job.
Yes.
And then ultimately gave up work
Yes.
to care for Christopher.
I did.
And in by July 1990, Christopher was really very unwell.
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us what was happening then?
Well, he used to have to go into hospital for blood. He had, I think it was the AZT that possibly made him anemic, or it could have been the HIV, I'm not quite sure. But I think anemia is a symptom of the AZT treatment sometimes. And so he'd have to go into hospital for blood transfusions occasionally. So he went in a couple of times for that. And
he was having high temperatures.
oh yes, then he used to have very high temperatures, and he used to have quite alarming hallucinations and that sort of thing, which were very alarming actually.
And that really distressed both him and you when he had these hallucinations.
Absolutely, and and the children as well, you know.
In July, he was hospitalised. He came home for a little bit of time, and then he was hospitalised again.
Yes.
And at that point, I think you were staying with him as much as you could.
Yes, he was very ill by this time, and he was rushed into hospital. He had some sort of blockage. I think he had some sort of major urinary infection or something. And anyway, he was rushed into hospital that time. His temperature was 105 or something. So we went. So he stayed in hospital, and I was able to stay with him in hospital, and my sisters-in-law, his sisters, used to come and help, and my daughter and my son as well. We all helped to nurse him, and I had magnificent support from all the family and friends as well. Mega support from friends.
Christopher wanted to come home for his final few weeks.
Yes.
What was the reaction of the hospital staff about
They weren't keen, really, but then he was quite determined to come home, and so Dr. Corn had said that he could come home if he had 24-hour nursing care. Well, but he was quite happy with the arrangement we made. I've got a superb friend who was nursing at the time, and she, well, I think it was between the social workers and whatever, that she arranged for some of her colleagues to come and do a night each, you know, so... and then I used to look after him in the day with the help of district nurses coming in as well. And you see, the thing is, we lived right out in the sticks, basically, but we had excellent care from you know, the local surgery. Brilliant. You couldn't have wished for anything better. And also from the haematology unit in Bangor, you know, they were fantastic.
And because of the input and help from your friend who was a nurse,
yes,
you were able to bring Christopher home.
We were, and
for the last couple of weeks.
Yes, I think he was home for about 2 or 3 weeks before he died. Yes.
And Christopher died in September 1990.
He did.
At the age of 46.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit of the impact of Christopher's illness and death and what that impact has been on you?
I'm just trying to think. It's devastating, isn't it? And then...
lost your job, didn't you?
Yes. I wasn't working, was I? And so then I had to sort of go back to work for an income. But I had tremendous support from family and friends. Brilliant.
And what was the impact on your children?
Oh, well, they went back to college. I mean, they were devastated as well. And of course, they didn't have their father to help them with applying for colleges and all that sort of thing, you know, and with their education and advice and things like that.
Your daughter, who sat next to you, has said in her statement that she struggled particularly after having her own child to gather to
Oh,
deal
absolutely. Yes. Well, he's missed out on my fantastic grandchildren. I've got 5.
And your son, in his statement, has said that a lot of the time he tries not to think about what's happened or to think about when he was nursing his dad, but when he's on his own, he comes to realise what the loss means.
Yes.
And that it hits the family at times that are unexpected.
I mean, it's 30 years ago, isn't it? It's a long time ago, really, but it's still, it still hits home occasionally, doesn't it, when we talk about it.
Earlier we talked about Christopher's relationship with Dr. Bloom.
Right.
And how the family viewed him. But since Christopher's death, you feel more conflicted in yourself about how to view Professor Bloom. Can you tell us a little bit about what your feelings are?
Well, I just want to know some answers, really, when Dr. Bloom, not just Professor Bloom, but, the Department of Health and government ministers, when they, and pharmaceutical companies, when they knew about the risks with the blood transfusions and things, when they knew about it and if they took immediate action, and if they didn't, why they didn't, basically.
In terms of the formalities after Christopher's death, can you tell us what was recorded on his initial death certificate?
Well, I think it was septicemia, and yes, I think it was just septicemia.
And then what happened?
Well, then, because it was septicemia, we had to have an inquest, and so I had a policeman visit me and ask me lots of questions, and then I had to go to the inquest and to the court and answer the questions again. But they were mostly about his medication and how it was administered and his nursing care. I think it was because he died at home. But they hadn't. I'm not sure whether they put HIV on the original death certificate or not.
You think that initially it was just septicemia?
I think so. Yes.
But after the inquest, what do you think?
And then yes, after the inquest, they had septicemia as a result of HIV infection. Yes.
You've mentioned just earlier that the financial impact on you was significant, of having to stop work.
Absolutely, yes.
And then you had to go back to work shortly after Christopher died
Yeah.
because of financial concerns.
Well, yes.
You received some financial support when Christopher was unwell.
Yes.
How did you access that?
Well, we had a social worker who from Harlech, and he was given access to our financial situation, and he was brilliant. Actually, he got grants for the kids to go to college, and he also we had some help from Christopher's Teachers Union and from the physiotherapy, the Chartered Physiotherapy Society. So I had a little bit of help from them, and then I think he also probably recommend. We had help from the Macfarlane Trust then as well.
To pay for that nursing care?
Oh, well, we had that for the nursing care, yes. That's when we first arranged that, yes, the nursing care, the night care that he had at home.
Then after Christopher died, you received some payments from the Macfarlane Trust.
I did.
Then more recently from the Welsh Infected Blood Support Scheme.
Yeah.
There was some delay in receiving the first Macfarlane payment. Can you tell us about that?
Well, I don't know that it was a delay particularly, but the fact that I had a widowed mother's pension because my son was under 18, and then my son he was 18 just after my husband died, and so, but I wasn't. I couldn't have a widow's pension because I was too young, and because I was under 45. So, and they just upped it actually. It used to be 40, and then I think it was the year before they'd upped it to 45. So I wasn't eligible for that.
So just around
for the widow's pension. So I lost out there.
So very shortly after Christopher's death,
So I didn't
missed out on the widowed mother's pension.
And then, yes, and
you
so I was a bit financially compromised then. But luckily, I'd started doing a little bit of private work, and then the Macfarlane Trust. I think it was in '91, wasn't it, that the Macfarlane Trust issued that payment. Which came at just the right time, actually, to be honest.
And since then, you and your daughter have appeared on some media campaigns supporting a campaign for the inquiry, and you've been involved in some campaign work.
Yes,
as Welsh speakers.
Sorry?
Particularly as Welsh speakers.
Well, my daughter has, yes. Yes, yes.
Those are the questions I have for you. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, just, and I've left it in my handbag, but oh no, I haven't, I've got it here. Thank you. I'd like to thank all those people who have campaigned for this inquiry for over 30 years, and I trust that the outcome will prevent such a harrowing tragedy from ever being allowed to happen again. And I also, and no one will ever really know how different our lives, all these people's lives, would be if our loved ones had not been infected with contaminated blood. Diolch yn fawr, thank you.
I'm just going to ask Mr. Williams. No, there's nothing wrong.
Well, can I thank you for that gently affectionate tribute to your husband, in a way which I suspect has concealed rather than revealed some of the heartache that must have come with it. But thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, Ms. Fraser-Butlin, that concludes the witness evidence for today. What do we have tomorrow?
We will be hearing from Tony and Monica Summers, Mr A.F., Jane Jones and Ms A.G.
Thank you. We will start that at 10 o'clock tomorrow. 10 o'clock.